I was washing my Harley when a pink blazer Karen appeared, demanding I hand over my bike to her son. When I refused, she called the cops right there. She didn't know I was recording everything and had an ace up my sleeve. Comment where you're watching from, subscribe to Black Stories Uncut 29. The Sunday morning Colorado sun was hitting my driveway just right as I worked the soap suds across my 2019 Harley-Davidson Road King. My 16-year-old son Tyler sat in his wheelchair beside me, telling me about his latest science project while I detailed every chrome piece on that beautiful machine. Life had been getting steadier for us since we lost Sarah last year, and these quiet Sunday mornings had become our sacred time. Tyler loved the rumble of the Harley's engine because somehow that deep vibration helped relax his muscles after those brutal physical therapy sessions. We'd been through hell and back, but we were finding our rhythm again in this Pine Ridge Estates community where everyone minded their own business, or so I thought. At exactly 10 a.m., like she'd been timing it with a stopwatch, this woman appeared at the end of my driveway wearing the most eye-searing pink blazer I'd ever seen. She had that particular Karen haircut, you know the one, and was carrying a leather portfolio like she was about to foreclose on someone's mortgage. Her heels clicked against my driveway with the kind of authority that screamed trouble, and Tyler immediately went quiet, sensing the shift in energy. I kept washing my bike, figuring she was probably selling something or collecting for some charity, but then she opened her mouth and changed everything. Mrs. Kylie Bradford, she introduced herself as the HOA president, and she had some very interesting demands about my motorcycle. According to this woman, they'd received multiple noise complaints about my Harley disrupting the peace of our pristine suburban community. She claimed that under HOA Regulation 4.7, I needed to immediately surrender my motorcycle to the community charity fund managed by her son Evan for the greater good of Pine Ridge Estates. The way she said it with this fake sweet smile and condescending tone made it sound like she was doing me some kind of favor. I set down my wash rag and asked her politely to show me this mysterious Regulation 4.7, maybe pointed out in the HOA handbook that every homeowner received. She started tap dancing around the question, talking about community standards and property values, but couldn't produce a single document with this supposed rule written anywhere. When I pressed harder asking for specific documentation and maybe a copy of these noise complaints, she mentioned Kylie's mask started slipping. She began talking about the HOA's broad authority to confiscate any property that negatively impacts community welfare, throwing around legal-sounding phrases that didn't actually mean anything. That's when I noticed she'd already called backup because 2 police officers were walking up my driveway like this was some kind of drug bust instead of a conversation about motorcycle ownership. Officer Johnson and his partner looked about as confused as I felt, probably wondering why they were being called to mediate what appeared to be a civil dispute between neighbors. Kylie immediately switched into victim mode, telling the officers that I was being uncooperative with lawful HOA regulations and potentially threatening community safety. I stayed calm, walked into my garage, and returned with my registration and title in a clear plastic sleeve, because I keep all my important documents organized exactly like my late wife taught me. Officer Johnson examined the paperwork carefully while Kylie stood there tapping her foot and checking her phone like she had somewhere more important to be. When he handed the documents back to me, he turned to Kylie with the kind of expression cops get when they realize they've been wasted on a bogus call. He explained that this appeared to be a civil matter between the homeowner and the HOA, and that police couldn't confiscate legally owned private property based on vague HOA complaints without specific violations of municipal law. Kylie's face turned approximately the same shade as her ridiculous pink blazer, and she started sputtering about how this wasn't over and how I'd be hearing from the HOA board very soon. She threatened an emergency HOA meeting and promised that I'd pay for my non-compliance, all while the 2 officers stood there looking increasingly annoyed at having their Sunday morning interrupted for this nonsense. As she stormed off toward her pristine white Mercedes, I noticed Tyler had been quietly recording the entire encounter on his iPhone, capturing every word of her threats and demands. That kid is smarter than I give him credit for sometimes, and his instinct to document everything would prove more valuable than either of us realized at the time. Within 24 hours of our driveway confrontation, Kylie Bradford launched what can only be described as a full-scale social media assassination campaign against me and my family. She posted on Nextdoor, the Pine Ridge Estates Facebook group, and apparently sent personal messages to half the neighborhood, claiming that I was operating a dangerous motorcycle that produced 120 decibel noise levels and terrorized children, elderly residents, and pets throughout the community. According to her posts, I had not only refused to comply with reasonable HOA regulations, but had also threatened police officers and showed complete disregard for my neighbors' well-being. The way she painted it, I was basically running some kind of motorcycle gang operation out of my suburban garage, disturbing the peace of our family-friendly neighborhood with my reckless behavior. What really got under my skin wasn't just the lies, but how she weaponized the immigration debate that's been tearing our country apart. In one of her posts, she made subtle references to people who come to America but refuse to follow our rules and respect our communities, clearly trying to stir up anti-immigrant sentiment, even though my family has been in Colorado for 3 generations. She was playing dirty politics, tapping into the same divisive rhetoric that's been poisoning our national discourse, and trying to turn my neighbors against me by suggesting I represented some kind of threat to their American way of life. It was disgusting manipulation, but I knew getting angry and responding emotionally would only make things worse, so I decided to fight back with facts instead of fury. My Uncle Donnie, who retired from the Denver Police Department 5 years ago and still has all his old investigation equipment, showed up at my house that Tuesday morning with a professional-grade decibel meter and a knowing smile. He'd seen Kylie's social media campaign and wanted to help me gather some real evidence instead of letting her propaganda war continue unchallenged. We fired up the Harley and took readings at various RPMs while he documented everything with timestamps and proper measurement techniques that would hold up in any legal proceeding. At idle, my bike registered 78 decibels, which is quieter than the average lawnmower, and even at full throttle, it never exceeded 95 decibels, well within Colorado's legal limits for residential areas. Uncle Donnie also noticed something interesting about our HOA president that I'd missed during our confrontation. According to the property records he pulled, Kylie Bradford had only moved to Pine Ridge Estates 6 months ago, relocating from Nevada, where HOA laws operate completely differently than they do in Colorado. She was trying to enforce Nevada-style regulations in a Colorado community, possibly without even realizing that she had no legal authority to do what she was attempting. Uncle Donnie's detective instincts were kicking in, and he started digging deeper into her background while I worked on crafting a measured response to her online attacks. Instead of getting dragged into a mudslinging contest, I posted a factual video response that included the decibel readings, referenced Colorado state law regarding noise ordinances, and made a broader point about how individual rights get trampled when people in positions of minor authority abuse their power. I also connected our situation to the larger political tensions dividing our country, pointing out that whether we're talking about immigration policy, Middle East conflicts, or neighborhood disputes, the same dangerous pattern emerges when people use fear and misinformation to justify taking away other people's rights. Just like how some politicians exploit immigration fears to grab power, and just like how conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine show us what happens when might makes right, our little HOA drama was really about whether we'd let bullies use official-sounding titles to steal what doesn't belong to them. My post gained traction beyond just our neighborhood, with people sharing their own HOA horror stories and expressing frustration with the small-scale tyranny that seems to be spreading across suburban America. That evening, my neighbor Rosa Martinez called me with some disturbing intelligence about Kylie's real motivations. Rosa works as a nurse at Denver General and has lived in Pine Ridge Estates for 8 years, long enough to know all the neighborhood gossip and observe people's patterns. She'd overheard a phone conversation between Kylie and her 19-year-old son Evan, where the truth about this motorcycle grab finally came to light. Apparently, Evan wanted to join some kind of motorcycle club in Denver but needed a high-end bike to prove he belonged with the group, and my Harley Davidson was exactly what he needed to establish his street credibility. This wasn't about noise complaints or community standards at all. This was about a spoiled kid who wanted my bike and a mother willing to abuse her HOA position to steal it for him. Rosa shared this information because, as she put it, she came to America legally from Mexico 15 years ago and knows the difference between justice and injustice, between people who follow rules and people who break them while hiding behind authority. She'd seen how corrupt officials in her home country used their positions to take whatever they wanted from ordinary citizens, and she wasn't going to stand by and watch the same thing happen in her American neighborhood. Her willingness to speak up gave me the missing piece of the puzzle, but it also made me realize that Kylie and Evan weren't going to give up just because I'd posted some decibel readings on Facebook. They were planning something bigger, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. That night, Tyler and I installed a complete security camera system around our property, and I quietly attached an AirTag inside my motorcycle seat, hidden where no one would think to look for it. Over the next 72 hours, something strange started happening with my Harley that would have been invisible without the AirTag I'd hidden inside the seat. 3 separate times during the night, the bike moved from its usual spot in my driveway to various locations around the neighborhood, only to be returned before sunrise like nothing had happened. Each movement lasted about 30 minutes, and the GPS tracking showed it being taken to different streets within Pine Ridge Estates, almost like someone was practicing the route or testing different escape paths. Tyler and I monitored these movements through the Find My iPhone app, documenting timestamps and locations while trying to figure out what kind of game Kylie and her son were playing. It was clear they were planning something bigger than just social media harassment, but we couldn't quite piece together their endgame until everything exploded at 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning. The AirTag alarm on my phone woke me up with its urgent beeping, and when I checked the location, my heart started racing because the bike was moving fast and heading away from our neighborhood toward the industrial district 15 miles away. Tyler grabbed his laptop, and we tracked the GPS signal in real time as my Harley traveled through Denver's back streets to a commercial garage complex where it finally stopped moving. This wasn't another practice run or neighborhood joyride, this was the real theft, and we had front row seats to watch it happen through technology they didn't know existed. Our security cameras had captured the whole operation, showing a professional tow truck with no license plates backing into our driveway, while Evan Bradford and 2 other young men worked quickly to load my motorcycle onto the flatbed trailer. What made this operation particularly infuriating was seeing Kylie Bradford sitting in her white Mercedes at the corner of our street, obviously serving as the lookout while her son and his friends committed what amounted to grand theft auto. She was coordinating the whole thing through text messages, probably thinking she was smart enough to avoid getting her hands directly dirty while still orchestrating the crime. The security footage showed her flashing her headlights twice when a police patrol car drove through the neighborhood, causing the thieves to pause their work until the coast was clear. This wasn't some spontaneous teenage prank, this was an organized crime operation being run by the HOA president herself, using her position of authority as cover for stealing a neighbor's property. Rosa Martinez proved once again to be our guardian angel when she provided additional video evidence from her Ring doorbell system that captured angles our cameras had missed. Her footage clearly showed Kylie's license plate, the faces of all 3 thieves, and most importantly, the VIN number of the tow truck they were using for the operation. Rosa also mentioned that she'd been documenting Kylie's suspicious behavior for weeks, because something about the woman had never felt right to her. As someone who'd immigrated legally from Mexico and worked hard to build a legitimate life in America, Rosa had a finely tuned sense for spotting people who operated outside the law while pretending to represent it. Her evidence would prove crucial, but first we had to deal with the immediate problem of my stolen motorcycle sitting in some random garage across town. At 8 a.m. sharp, my phone rang with a call from Kylie Bradford herself, and the sheer audacity of what she said next still amazes me to this day. She explained that my motorcycle had been confiscated by the HOA for violating community noise ordinances and failure to comply with board directives, and that I could retrieve it by paying a $5,000 processing fee and signing an agreement never to operate the vehicle within Pine Ridge Estates again. She delivered this extortion demand with the same fake sweet tone she'd used during our driveway confrontation, acting like this was all standard HOA procedure, rather than felony theft and extortion. Fortunately for me, Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording phone conversations, and I captured every word of her criminal demands on my iPhone while she explained the terms of my bike's ransom. When I asked her directly if she was trying to extort money from me, Kylie had the nerve to claim this was simply administrative protocol, and that I had 48 hours to decide whether I wanted to pay the fee and sign the agreement, or forfeit my motorcycle permanently to the community charity fund. The legal implications of what she was saying were staggering, because she was essentially admitting to theft, extortion, and conspiracy, while probably thinking she was protected by her HOA position. After I hung up, I immediately called my old college friend Catherine Walsh, who now serves as Colorado's State Attorney General, and explained the entire situation from the beginning. Catherine listened to the recorded phone call, reviewed the security footage, and told me this had escalated far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute into federal criminal territory that her office would need to investigate immediately. The next phase of our plan required patience and precision because we needed to gather enough evidence to ensure Kylie and her co-conspirators face serious legal consequences rather than just getting their hands slapped. Catherine advised me to act normally while her investigators worked behind the scenes to build a case that would stick in court and send a message to other HOA tyrants across Colorado. Meanwhile, Uncle Donnie had been conducting his own investigation into the tow truck operation and discovered something that connected our local crime to a much bigger network. The VIN number Rosa had captured matched a vehicle that had been reported stolen 2 years earlier in Nevada, the same state where Kylie had lived before moving to Colorado. This wasn't just about one spoiled kid wanting a motorcycle, this was about people who made a living stealing other people's property and moving it across state lines. Kylie Bradford called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday evening, ostensibly to address my ongoing non-compliance with community regulations and formally vote on permanent confiscation and redistribution of my property to the community charity fund managed by her son, Evan. The meeting notice she sent to all 50 households in Pine Ridge Estates painted me as a dangerous rebel who threatened property values and neighborhood safety by refusing to follow reasonable rules that everyone else managed to obey. Her language was carefully crafted to make it sound like this was about protecting families and maintaining community standards, rather than stealing my motorcycle. But anyone paying attention could see through the propaganda to the power grab underneath. She was betting that most neighbors would stay home and let her railroad through whatever decision she wanted, giving her the appearance of legitimate authority for what was actually organized crime. The community response to this meeting invitation revealed how deeply Kylie's manipulation had divided our neighborhood along lines that reflected the broader political fractures tearing apart America right now. On one side were the families who valued peace and quiet above everything else, mostly older residents and people with young children who genuinely worried about motorcycle noise, even though my bike met all legal sound requirements. These folks weren't necessarily bad people, but they'd been convinced by Kylie's misinformation campaign that I represented some kind of threat to their suburban paradise, and they were willing to support harsh measures to eliminate that perceived threat. On the other side were families who understood that property rights formed the foundation of American freedom, mostly veterans, immigrants, and people who'd lived through enough history to recognize tyranny, even when it came wearing a pink blazer and carrying an official-looking portfolio. Mrs. Anderson, an 84-year-old widow who'd lived through the Great Depression and World War II, became an unexpected ally when she started connecting our local dispute to the broader challenges facing American democracy. She pointed out that when government officials can arbitrarily seize private property without due process, whether we're talking about local HOA boards or federal agencies, ordinary citizens lose the protection that separates free societies from authoritarian ones. Her perspective resonated with families who'd been watching recent events in places like Gaza and Ukraine, where property rights and individual freedoms disappear when might makes right, and people with official titles decide they can take whatever they want from whoever they want. Mrs. Anderson's support gave other neighbors permission to question Kylie's authority and demand transparency about HOA procedures that most people had never bothered to examine. The night of the meeting, I arrived at the community center with a carefully organized folder containing all our evidence, my laptop loaded with audio and video files, and the confidence that comes from knowing you're fighting for something bigger than just one motorcycle. Tyler insisted on coming despite his wheelchair, making transportation complicated because, as he put it, this was about whether bullies could use official positions to hurt families like ours who'd already been through enough trauma. Rosa Martinez came as our witness and translator since several immigrant families in our neighborhood needed someone they trusted to help them understand the legal implications of what was happening. Uncle Donnie provided security consultation and technical support, setting up recording equipment to document everything that happened during the meeting itself. Kylie opened the proceedings with a PowerPoint presentation that would have been impressive if it wasn't completely based on fabricated evidence and twisted logic designed to justify theft. Her slides covered community noise standards, property value protection, and the HOA's supposedly broad authority to confiscate items that negatively impact neighborhood harmony. She presented charts showing declining home values in areas with excessive motorcycle activity, testimonials from residents claiming sleep disruption and safety concerns, and legal precedents for HOA intervention in situations involving problematic vehicles. The final slide announced the board's decision to permanently confiscate Marcus Thompson's Harley Davidson and transfer ownership to the Evan Bradford Community Charity Foundation, subject only to a formal vote by attending residents. When Kylie finished her presentation and asked if anyone had questions or comments, I stood up and requested permission to present evidence that might be relevant to the board's decision. The room fell silent as I opened my laptop and began playing the recording of her extortion phone call, her voice clearly demanding $5,000 in exchange for returning my stolen property. You could hear people gasping and whispering as they realized their HOA president was essentially running a criminal enterprise using her official position to legitimize what amounted to organized theft and blackmail. Next, I showed Rosa's security footage of Evan and his accomplices loading my motorcycle onto an unlicensed tow truck, while Kylie served as lookout, providing visual proof that this entire situation was based on lies and corruption, rather than legitimate community concerns. The final piece of evidence I shared was Uncle Donnie's professional acoustic analysis, proving that my Harley Davidson operated well within Colorado's legal noise limits and was actually quieter than the landscaping equipment used by most neighbors on weekday mornings. By this point, the mood in the room had shifted completely from uncertainty to outrage, as people realized they'd been manipulated by someone they'd trusted to protect their community interests. Several residents stood up to share their own stories of Kylie's questionable behavior, including attempts to fine families for wheelchair ramps, ethnic garden decorations, and religious holiday displays that supposedly violated architectural guidelines. The pattern was clear. This woman had been using her HOA position to control and extort neighbors for months, and my motorcycle was just her most ambitious theft attempt yet. Just as I finished presenting our evidence, and the room erupted in angry discussions about Kylie's abuse of power, the community center doors opened, and State Attorney General Catherine Walsh walked in, accompanied by two Colorado Bureau of Investigation detectives. The timing was perfect, almost cinematic, as Catherine introduced herself to the stunned residents and explained that they were there to investigate serious criminal allegations against the HOA board and certain community members. Kylie's face went completely white as she realized that her little neighborhood kingdom was about to collapse under the weight of state law enforcement, and that her position as HOA president provided zero protection against federal charges for theft, extortion, and conspiracy. The 50 residents packed into that community center were about to witness the kind of justice that most Americans only see in movies. Catherine Walsh commanded the room with the kind of quiet authority that comes from prosecuting real criminals rather than bullying neighbors, and her preliminary findings painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond just my stolen motorcycle. She revealed that Kylie Bradford had multiple prior convictions for identity theft and fraud in Nevada, information that should have disqualified her from any HOA leadership position if proper background checks had been conducted. The Evan Bradford Community Charity Foundation was completely fraudulent, never registered with the IRS or any legitimate charitable organization, existing only as a shell company to provide legal cover for stolen property. Most shocking of all, the tow truck used in my bike's theft was connected to a multi-state vehicle theft ring that had been operating between Nevada, Colorado, and Wyoming for the past 3 years. As Catherine laid out, the criminal network that had been operating under the cover of HOA authority residents began connecting dots about suspicious incidents they'd witnessed but never reported. The Martinez family revealed that Kylie had tried to confiscate their patio furniture, claiming it violated community aesthetic standards, while suggesting they donate it to Evan's charity foundation. Vietnam veteran Mike Davis shared how his flagpole had been declared a neighborhood hazard that needed immediate removal, with Kylie offering to dispose of it through proper channels that probably meant selling it for scrap metal. Mrs. Chen described losing her decorative garden stones after a similar process, while the Rodriguez family had been forced to remove their wheelchair ramp after Kylie claimed it didn't meet architectural guidelines and represented a liability issue for the HOA insurance policy. When Catherine announced that Kylie Bradford was being arrested on charges of grand theft, extortion, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise, the community center erupted in applause from people who'd been victims of her schemes for months. Evan Bradford, who'd been sitting in the back row, probably expecting to take ownership of my motorcycle by the end of the evening, found himself in handcuffs, facing charges for auto theft, conspiracy, and receiving stolen property across state lines. The two accomplices who'd helped with the actual theft were arrested at the garage where they'd been storing stolen vehicles from across the Denver metropolitan area, and their cooperation with investigators revealed the scope of the criminal network that had been operating under various HOA and charity organization covers. The aftermath of that dramatic evening transformed Pine Ridge Estates from a community living under petty tyranny into something resembling an actual democracy, where residents participated in decisions rather than having rules imposed by corrupt officials. We held new elections for the HOA board, established transparent procedures for rule changes and enforcement, and created oversight mechanisms to prevent future abuse of authority. Mrs. Anderson was elected as our new president, bringing her Depression-era wisdom about protecting individual rights while maintaining community cooperation. Uncle Donnie recovered his garden gnome that Kylie had confiscated 6 months earlier, declaring its return to be symbolic of how ordinary Americans can reclaim their freedom when they stand together against bullies who abuse official positions. 6 months later, Tyler and I took that Harley Davidson on a cross-country road trip to visit family and see parts of America we'd never experienced together. Our final stop was Mount Rushmore, where we recorded a video message about how this whole experience taught us that justice sometimes takes time, but eventually arrives when good people refuse to surrender their rights to small-time tyrants. We talked about how the same principles that built America, individual liberty protected by fair laws enforced by accountable officials, still work today when citizens demand transparency and hold their leaders responsible for criminal behavior. The support we received from neighbors like Rosa Martinez and Mrs. Anderson proved that communities can overcome division and manipulation when people choose cooperation over conflict. This story represents something deeper than just one family's fight against a corrupt HOA president. It shows how ordinary Americans can protect their rights in their communities by staying calm under pressure, gathering evidence instead of getting angry, and working within the system to hold criminals accountable, regardless of what official titles they hide behind. Whether we're dealing with immigration debates that divide neighborhoods, international conflicts that test our values, or local bullies who abuse small amounts of power, the same principles apply. Document everything, know your rights, build coalitions with trustworthy neighbors, and never surrender your freedom just because someone claims authority over you. The tools we used to defeat Kylie Bradford: security cameras, audio recording, GPS tracking, professional investigation, and legal accountability, are available to every American facing similar situations. The support network we built connecting with neighbors who shared our values and officials who respected the law demonstrates how communities can protect themselves when individuals refuse to be victims and instead become advocates for justice. Most importantly, this experience proved that you don't have to be wealthy or politically connected to defend your rights against people who think their positions make them untouchable. If you've enjoyed this story of justice served and community restoration, please subscribe to Black Stories Uncut 29 for more real-life accounts of ordinary people overcoming extraordinary challenges through courage, intelligence, and determination. Our channel features authentic stories from across America where individuals refuse to accept injustice and instead fight back using the tools our legal system provides to protect everyone's rights. Each story offers practical lessons about defending yourself, your family, and your community against those who would abuse their authority for personal gain. Like this video if it resonated with your own experiences, comment with your thoughts about HOA abuse or community organizing, and check out our previous episodes for more inspiring examples of American justice in action. Together, we can ensure that bullies wearing official titles learn the same lesson. Kylie Bradford learned that in America, the law protects everyone, not just those who think they're above it.